There is a country in Europe that has no army. It has never had an army. It has no air force, no navy, no military of any kind. It sits between France and Spain, two of the most historically militarized nations on the continent. And it has watched every major European war from the sidelines for 700 years. The First World War, the Second World War, the Napoleonic Wars, the Spanish Civil War. Every conflict that reshaped the borders and populations of Europe passed around this country like water around a stone. It was not conquered by Napoleon. It was not occupied by Hitler. It was not drawn into the chaos of the Spanish Civil War that consumed the country directly on its southern border. It sat in its mountains, completely untouched, and continued doing exactly what it had been doing since 1778. Most people cannot find it on a map. Many people are not certain it is a real country at all when they first hear about it. It has a population of 77,000 people. It covers 686 square kilometers, smaller than many cities. It has one of the highest standards of living in the world, almost no unemployment, and a crime rate so low that its police force spends most of its time dealing with traffic and lost tourists. It has been continuously governed under the same basic political arrangement for longer than most countries have existed, and almost nobody talks about it. The country is called Andorra. And the question that Forgotten Files wants to ask tonight is not just what Andorra is, it is how. How does a tiny, defenseless country survive for 700 years between two empires without being swallowed whole? How does a nation with no military, no nuclear deterrent, and no powerful allies maintain its independence across 7 centuries of European warfare? And what does the answer to that question tell us about everything we think we know about how power and survival actually work? Welcome to Forgotten Files. Tonight, we open the file on the country that should not exist, but does. To understand Andorra, you have to go back to the year 1778. At this point in history, Europe is a continent of competing feudal powers. Kings, bishops, counts, and dukes are in constant conflict over territory, taxation, and authority. The land that is now Andorra sits in the eastern Pyrenees mountains and has been a source of dispute between two powerful regional lords, the Count of Foix, who controlled territory on the French side of the mountains, and the Bishop of Urgell, who controlled territory on the Spanish side. Both of them wanted Andorra. Both of them had legitimate historical claims to it, and both of them had the military capability to take it by force if they chose to. What happened instead was something remarkably unusual for 13th century Europe. They negotiated. In 1778, the Count of Foix and the Bishop of Urgell signed an agreement called a peerages, a feudal contract that divided sovereignty over Andorra between them equally. Neither lord would own Andorra outright. Both would share it. The Count and the Bishop would each receive a tribute from the Andorran people every 2 years, alternating payments, carefully specified in the document. The Andorrans themselves would be protected by both lords and subject to neither exclusively. This arrangement, called co-princeship, meant that Andorra had not one ruler, but 2. And crucially, it meant that any power that wanted to conquer Andorra would have to simultaneously defeat both the Count of Foix and the Bishop of Urgell, who each had their own networks of alliances, armies, and political relationships. Attacking Andorra meant picking a fight with 2 feudal powers at once. For most potential aggressors, that calculation simply was not worth it. In a single legal document, signed in 1278, Andorra had found the mechanism for its survival. Not military power, not natural resources, not a powerful protector. A legal arrangement so clever that it made the country more trouble to attack than it was worth. That document is still in force today. Andorra still has two co-princes. One of them is the Bishop of Urgel in Spain, a position that has existed in an unbroken line since 1278. The other is the President of France, because when the French Revolution abolished the County of Foix, the rights of the Count eventually passed to the French head of state. The co-princes of Andorra today are a Catholic bishop and the elected president of a republic. A medieval feudal contract from 1278 is still the legal foundation of a functioning 21st century nation. That is not a historical curiosity. That is one of the most extraordinary acts of institutional survival in the history of human governance. The geography of Andorra is not incidental to its survival. It is central to it. The Pyrenees mountains that surround the country on all sides are not merely scenic. They are, and have been for thousands of years, one of the most formidable natural barriers in Europe. The mountain passes into Andorra are narrow, treacherous, and at high altitude. In winter, they are frequently impassable. An army attempting to move through the Pyrenees in winter with any significant equipment, siege weapons, supply wagons, artillery in later centuries, would face conditions that made the military exercise extraordinarily costly, even before encountering any resistance. This geographic reality shaped how every power in the region calculated the value of conquering Andorra. The question was never simply, can we take this territory? The question was, what does this territory give us that is worth the cost of taking it in these conditions? And the answer, for most of Andorra's history, was not very much. Andorra had no significant mineral wealth. It had no major port. It had no position astride a critical trade route that could not be accessed by other means. What it had was mountains, sheep, and a small population of farmers and shepherds who were difficult to govern and not particularly valuable to tax. For a medieval king calculating the return on a military campaign, Andorra was simply not worth the investment. The mountains did not make conquest impossible. They made it expensive. And the peerage arrangement of 1778 added a political cost on top of the military one. Together, geography and legal structure created a combination that deterred aggression more effectively than any army Andorra could have fielded. This is a pattern that repeats throughout Andorra's history. Not strength, but the management of the cost-benefit calculation of attacking it. The country survived not by being powerful, but by being consistently more difficult to conquer than it was valuable to control. The test of Andorra's survival mechanism came not in a minor regional dispute, but in the most catastrophic series of events in European history, the Napoleonic Wars. Between 1803 and 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte reorganized the entire political map of Europe. Kingdoms that had existed for centuries were abolished overnight. Ancient dynasties were replaced by Napoleon's relatives. The Holy Roman Empire, which had existed in various forms since 800 AD, was dissolved by Napoleon in 1806. Countries that had maintained their independence for generations were absorbed into the French Empire or turned into client states. Europe was, in the most literal sense, being remade. Andorra sat on the border of France during all of this. Napoleon's armies were marching through Spain. The Pyrenees were a zone of active military operations. And yet, Andorra was not absorbed. It was not occupied. It was not reorganized. There is a story, possibly apocryphal, but widely told, that Napoleon actually considered abolishing the co-princership arrangement and incorporating Andorra into France. He had, after all, abolished far older and more powerful political entities without hesitation. The reason he reportedly declined to do so was practical rather than sentimental. The Andorrans paid their tribute to the French co-prince, by this point the French head of state, and had done so faithfully throughout the revolutionary period. They were, from a French administrative perspective, already cooperating subjects who provided modest revenue and caused no trouble. Abolishing their special status would cost more in administrative reorganization than it would generate in benefit. Once again, Andorra survived not through strength, but through the mathematics of inconvenience. It was less trouble to leave alone than to incorporate. Napoleon, who remade the world, looked at this tiny mountain country and decided it was not worth his administrative attention. Andorra continued. If the Napoleonic Wars were the first great test, the Second World War was the test that should, by any reasonable historical logic, have been impossible to survive. By 1940, Nazi Germany had occupied France. The Vichy government, the French administration that collaborated with Germany, controlled southern France, right up to the Pyrenees border. Spain, under Francisco Franco, was a fascist dictatorship that had won a brutal civil war with German and Italian support, and maintained close relationships with both the Nazi and fascist regimes. Andorra sat between occupied France and Franco's Spain, surrounded on all sides by fascist power. And yet once again, it was not occupied. Not by Germany, not by Vichy France, not by Franco's Spain. The reasons are familiar by now, but they are no less remarkable for being consistent. Germany had no strategic interest in Andorra's territory that was worth the political complication of violating the co-princership arrangement, which would have required either getting the Bishop of Urgell, a Spanish Catholic bishop, to agree, or simply ignoring the agreement and angering Franco, who was not formally Germany's ally, and whose cooperation Hitler was trying to maintain. Franco's Spain, for its part, did not want to absorb a territory that came with a co-sovereignty claim by France that would need to be resolved diplomatically. The Bishop of Urgell continued to exercise his co-princeship throughout the war, providing a thread of institutional continuity that neither occupying power found it worth severing. Andorra was also, during this period, genuinely useful to both sides as a neutral territory. It functioned as a passage point for refugees fleeing occupied France into Spain. It functioned as a channel for intelligence and communication between different parties. A neutral Andorra was more valuable than an occupied Andorra. The country's very smallness and apparent insignificance had become, again, its most effective defense. The war ended. Andorra was intact. It had survived the most destructive conflict in human history by being, once again, more useful left alone than absorbed. There is another dimension of Andorra's story that is almost never told in the brief mentions it receives in popular media, and it is the dimension that makes the country genuinely extraordinary, rather than merely unusual. Andorra's domestic governance, the way it organizes itself internally, is as remarkable as its external survival. For most of its history, Andorra was governed by a council called the Casa de Laval, which served as the country's parliament. What is remarkable about this institution is when it was established. The Casa de Laval was founded in 1419. The Parliament of the United Kingdom, often described as the Mother of Parliaments, held its first meeting in 1265, but in a form that bore almost no resemblance to a modern democratic institution. Andorra's governing council, operating in a tiny mountain country that most of Europe did not know existed, was functioning as a representative body for its population in the 15th century. The council represented the 6 parishes, the administrative divisions of Andorra, and made decisions about taxation, justice, and governance through deliberation rather than royal decree. This was not democracy in the modern sense. It was not universal suffrage. Women could not vote. Only heads of household participated. But the principle that governance required the consent and participation of the governed rather than simply the will of a ruler was embedded in Andorra's political culture centuries before it became the dominant organizing principle of Western political thought. Andorra did not have a written constitution until 1993. For 700 years before that, it was governed by custom, tradition, and a parade arrangement of 1778. And in 1993, when it finally adopted a formal constitution, it did so without a revolution, without a civil war, without the violent rupture that accompanied the transition to constitutional government in almost every other country. It simply updated its arrangements peacefully. The country that invented its own survival mechanism in 1278 quietly modernized it 700 years later, without drama, without crisis. Because that, apparently, is how Andorra does things. Today, Andorra is one of the wealthiest countries in the world by per capita income. Its economy runs primarily on tourism and retail. It is a tax haven with extremely low rates of VAT and income tax, which makes it a destination for shoppers from France and Spain who cross the border to buy goods significantly more cheaply than they can at home. Millions of tourists visit every year, drawn by the skiing, the shopping, the dramatic mountain scenery, and the peculiarity of a country this small and this old. The capital city, Andorra la Vella, is the highest capital city in Europe, sitting at 1,023 meters above sea level. The country has a literacy rate of essentially 100%. It has one of the highest life expectancies in the world. It ranks consistently in global measurements of quality of life, stability, and safety. And it has no army. Its police force, the Cos de Policia, handles crime, traffic, and public order. There is no military branch. There are no tanks, no fighter jets, no warships. The entire security apparatus of the country is a civilian police force. Andorra has been criticized in recent decades for its role as a tax haven, and for some of the opacity in its financial sector that this status creates. These are legitimate criticisms, and they are part of the full picture, but they do not diminish the central remarkable fact about this country, which is that it exists at all. That a nation of 77,000 people in the mountains between France and Spain has maintained its independence, its distinctive political arrangements, and its way of life for 745 years. Through every upheaval that European history has produced, without ever fielding an army. It is the living proof of an argument that most of human history has refused to accept, that survival does not require military power, that a sufficiently clever political arrangement, in the right geography, with the right management of how other powers calculate your value, can outlast empires. The story of Andorra raises a question that goes beyond one small country in the Pyrenees. It raises a question about the assumptions that underlie how we think about national security, sovereignty, and survival. The dominant model of international relations, the one taught in universities, the one that shapes the decisions of governments and the budgets of nations, assumes that military power is the ultimate guarantor of a country's existence. That without the ability to defend yourself by force, you are at the mercy of those who can. This assumption is so deeply embedded in how we think about the world that it is rarely examined. It is treated as a fact of nature rather than a historical pattern. That has exceptions. There are others. Costa Rica abolished its military in 1948 and has been one of the most stable and prosperous countries in Central America ever since. Iceland has no standing army and has never been invaded. Liechtenstein, another tiny European microstate, abolished its military in 1868 after its last war, in which it sent 80 soldiers to fight and returned with 81, having made a friend along the way, and has not had one since. These countries are not naive. They are not unaware of the world's violence. They have simply found other mechanisms for their security. Geographic, diplomatic, economic, legal, that have proven more reliable than military spending. Andorra's answer was found in 1778, in a document that made it more complicated to attack than to leave alone. It then maintained that answer for 7 centuries through a combination of geographic reality, political consistency, and the steady management of other powers' incentives. In a world that spends over $2 trillion every year on military budgets, Andorra is a quiet, inconvenient argument that there might be other ways. It does not prove that military power is never necessary. It proves that it is not always necessary. And that is a more interesting and more important distinction than it might first appear. Every visual you have seen in this video was created using artificial intelligence. Andorra's history stretches back to the 13th century, and the visual record of its early centuries, the signing of the peerage, the medieval council chambers, the mountain passes that protected it through centuries of European warfare, exists only in documents and written accounts. AI gave us the ability to reconstruct those worlds visually, to show you the mountains as they would have looked to a feudal lord calculating whether they were worth crossing, to show you the council chamber where governance happened for 6 centuries, to show you the contrast between the destruction of the Second World War surrounding Andorra and the unchanged mountain villages within it. We use AI because these stories deserve to be seen, not just read. And because the technology that makes that possible is, we think, as much a tool of historical preservation as it is anything else. Andorra has existed since 1078. It has no army. It has never had an army. It has survived Napoleon, Hitler, Franco, 2 world wars, and 7 centuries of European political upheaval by being, consistently, more trouble to conquer than it was worth. It sits in its mountains between France and Spain, 77,000 people living at the highest capital in Europe, and it has outlasted every empire that ever looked at it and decided it was too small to matter. That is the File, a country that should not exist, that has existed longer than most countries that do, that found its survival not in weapons, but in a legal document and a mountain range, and the consistent, careful management of other people's incentives. Forgotten Files exists because history is full of stories like this, stories that do not fit the standard narrative, stories that were considered too small, too obscure, too geographically peripheral to include in the version of history that gets taught. We think those are exactly the stories worth telling. Subscribe to Forgotten Files so you are here when we open the next one. If this episode showed you something you did not know, share it with one person who needs to see it. The files do not run out. History is full of them. We will see you in the next one.